The life of the people. The following analysis will apply for the most part to post-Vedic and pre-British India. The reader should remember that India is now in flux, and that institutions, morals, and manners once characteristic of her may be disappearing today. The makers of wealth. The jungle background. Agriculture, mining, handicrafts, commerce, money, taxes, famines, poverty and wealth. The soil of India had not lent itself willingly to civilization. A great part of it was jungle, the jealously guarded home of lions, tigers, elephants, serpents, and other individualists with a Rousseauian contempt for civilization. The biological struggle to free the land from these enemies had continued underneath all the surface dramas of political and economic strife. Akbar shot tigers near Mathura and captured wild elephants in many places where none can be found today. In Vedic times, the lion might be met with anywhere in northwest or central India. Now it is almost extinct throughout the peninsula. The serpent and the insect, however, still carry on the war. In 1926, some 2,000 Hindus were killed by wild animals, 875 by marauding tigers, but 20,000 Hindus met death from the fangs of snakes. Gradually, as the soil was redeemed from the beast, it was turned to the cultivation of rice, pulse, millet, vegetables, and fruits. Through the greater part of Indian history, the majority of the population have lived abstemiously on these natural foods, reserving flesh, fish, and fowl for the outcasts and the rich. Vijayanagar was an exception. Its people ate fowl and flesh, barring oxen and cows, as well as lizards, rats, and cats. To render their diet more exciting, and perhaps to assist Aphrodite, the Hindus have grown and consumed an unusual abundance of ginger, curry, cinnamon, cloves, and other spices. Europeans valued these spices so highly that they stumbled upon a hemisphere in search for them. Who knows but that America was discovered for the sake of love? In Vedic times, the land belonged to the people. But from the days of Chandragupta Maurya, it became the habit of the kings to claim royal ownership of all the soil, and to let it out to the tiller for an annual rental and tax. Irrigation was usually a government undertaking. One of the dams raised by Chandragupta functioned till 150 AD. Remains of the ancient canals can be seen everywhere today, and signs still survive of the artificial lake that Raj Singh, Rajput Rana of Mewar, built as an irrigation reservoir, 1661, in which he surrounded with a marble wall 12 miles in length. The Hindus seem to have been the first people to mine gold. Herodotus and Megasthenes tell of the great, quote, gold-digging ants, in size somewhat less than dogs but bigger than foxes, end quote, which helped the miners to find the metal by turning it up in the scratching of the sand. We do not know what these ants were. They were more probably anteaters than ants. Much of the gold used in the Persian Empire in the 5th century before Christ came from India. Silver, lead, copper, tin, zinc, and iron were also mined. Iron as early as 1500 BC. The art of tempering and casting iron developed in India long before its known appearance in Europe. Vikramaditya, for example, erected at Delhi around 380 AD, an iron pillar that stands untarnished today after 15 centuries, and the quality of metal or manner of treatment which has preserved it from rust or decay is still a mystery to modern metallurgical science. Before the European invasion, the smelting of iron in small charcoal furnaces was one of the major industries of India. The Industrial Revolution taught Europe how to carry out these processes more cheaply on a larger scale, and the Indian industry died under the competition. Only in our own time are the rich mineral resources of India being again exploited and explored. The growing of cotton appears earlier in India than elsewhere. Apparently it was used for cloth in Mohenjo-daro. In our oldest classical reference to cotton, Herodotus says, with pleasing ignorance, certain wild trees there bear wool instead of fruit, which in beauty and quality excels that of sheep, and the Indians make their clothing from these trees. It was their wars in the Near East that acquainted the Romans with this tree-grown wool. Arabian travelers in 9th century India reported that in this country they make garments of such extraordinary perfection that nowhere else is their like to be seen. Sewed and woven to such a degree of fineness, they may be drawn through a ring of moderate size. The medieval Arabs took over the art from India, and their word kutan gave us our word cotton. The name muslin was originally applied to fine cotton weaves made in Mosul from Indian models. Calico was so called because it came, first in 1631, from Calicut, on the southwestern shores of India. Embroidery, says Marco Polo, speaking of Gujarat in 1293 AD, is here performed with more delicacy than in any other part of the world. The shawls of Kashmir and the rugs of India bear witness even today to the excellence of Indian weaving in texture and design. Reference the red rug from 17th century India, presented to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, room D3, by Mr. J.P. Morgan. But weaving was only one of the many handicrafts of India, and the weavers were only one of the many craft and merchant guilds that organized and regulated the industry of India. Europe looked upon the Hindus as experts in almost every line of manufacture: woodwork, ivory work, metalwork, bleaching, dyeing, tanning, soap making, glass blowing, gunpowder, fireworks, cement, and the like. China imported eyeglasses from India in 1260 AD. Bernier, traveling in India in the 17th century, described it as humming with industry. Fitch, in 1585, saw a fleet of 180 boats carrying a great variety of goods down the river Jumna. Internal trade flourished. Every roadside was, and is, a bazaar. The foreign trade of India is as old as her history. Objects found in Sumeria and Egypt indicate a traffic between these countries and India as far back as 3000 BC. Commerce between India and Babylon by the Persian Gulf flourished from 700 to 480 BC, and perhaps the ivory, apes, and peacocks of Solomon came by the same route from the same source. India's ships sailed the sea to Burma and China in Chandragupta's days, and Greek merchants, called Yavana, Ionians by the Hindus, thronged the markets of Dravidian India in the centuries before and after the birth of the Christ. Rome, in her Epicurean days, depended upon India for spices, perfumes, and unguents, and paid great prices for Indian silks, brocades, muslins, and cloth of gold. Pliny condemned the extravagance which sent $5 million yearly from Rome to India for such luxuries. Indian cheetahs, elephants, and tigers assisted in the gladiatorial games and sacrificial rites of the Colosseum. The Parthian wars were fought by Rome largely to keep open the trade route to India. In the 7th century, the Arabs captured Egypt and Persia, and thereafter made trade between Europe and Asia pass through Muslim hands. Hence the Crusades and Columbus. Under the Mughals, foreign commerce rose again. The wealth of Venice, Genoa, and other Italian cities grew through their service as ports for European trade with India in the East. The Renaissance owed more to the wealth derived from this trade than to the manuscripts brought to Italy by the Greeks. Akbar had an admiralty which supervised the building of ships and the regulation of ocean traffic. The ports of Bengal and Sind were famous for shipbuilding, and did their work so well that the Sultan of Constantinople found it cheaper to have his vessels built there than in Alexandria. Even the East India Company had many of its ships built in Bengal docks. The development of coinage to facilitate this trade took many centuries. In Buddha's days, rough rectangular coins were issued by various economic and political authorities. But it was not until the 4th century before Christ that India, under the influence of Persia and Greece, arrived at a coinage guaranteed by the state. Sher Shah issued well-designed pieces of copper, gold, and silver, and established the rupee as the basic coin of the realm. Under Akbar and Jahangir, the coinage of India was superior in artistic execution and purity of metal to that of any modern European state. As in medieval Europe, so in medieval India, the growth of industry and commerce was impeded by a religious antipathy to the taking of interest. The Indians, says Megasthenes, neither put out money at usury, interest, nor know how to borrow. It is contrary to established usage for an Indian either to do or to suffer wrong, and therefore they neither make contracts nor require securities. When the Hindu could not invest his savings in his own economic enterprises, he preferred to hide them, or to buy jewelry as conveniently hoardable wealth. Perhaps this failure to develop a facile credit system aided the Industrial Revolution to establish the European domination of Asia. Slowly, however, despite the hostility of the Brahmins, money lending grew. The rates varied, according to the caste of the borrower, from 12 to 60%, usually ranging about 20. Bankruptcy was not permitted as a liquidation of debts. If a debtor died insolvent, his descendants to the 6th generation continued to be responsible for his obligations. Both trade and agriculture were heavily taxed to support the government. The peasant had to surrender from 1/6 to 1/2 of his crop, and as in medieval and contemporary Europe, many tolls were laid upon the flow and exchange of goods. Akbar raised the land tax to 1/3, but abolished all other exactions. The land tax was a bitter levy, but it had the saving grace of rising with prosperity and falling with depression. And in famine years, the poor could at least die untaxed. For famines occurred, even in Akbar's palmy days. That of 1556 seems to have led to cannibalism and widespread desolation. Roads were bad, transportation was slow, and the surplus of one region could with difficulty be used to supply the dearth of another. As everywhere, there were extremes of poverty and wealth, but hardly so great as in India or America today. At the bottom was a small minority of slaves. Above them, the Shudras were not so much slaves as hired men, though their status, like that of almost all Hindus, was hereditary. The poverty described by Père Dubois was the result of 50 years of political chaos. Under the Mughals, the condition of the people had been relatively prosperous. Wages were modest, ranging from manual workers from 3 cents to 9 cents a day in Akbar's reign. But prices were correspondingly low. In 1600, a rupee, normally 32.5 cents, bought 194 pounds of wheat, or 278 pounds of barley. In 1901, it bought only 29 pounds of wheat, or 44 pounds of barley. An Englishman resident in India in 1616 described the plenty of all provisions as very great throughout the whole monarchy, and added that everyone there may eat bread without scarceness. Another Englishman, touring India in the 17th century, found that his expenses averaged 4 cents a day. The wealth of the country reached its 2 peaks under Chandragupta Maurya and Shah Jahan. The riches of India under the Gupta kings became a proverb throughout the world. Yuan Shuang pictured an Indian city as beautified with pools and gardens, and adorned with institutes of letters and arts. Quote, "The inhabitants were well off, and there were families with great wealth. Fruit and flowers were abundant. The people had a refined appearance and dressed in glossy silks. They were clear and suggestive in discourse. They were equally divided between orthodoxy and heterodoxy." End quote. The Hindu kingdoms overthrown by the Muslims, says Elphinstone, were so wealthy that the historians tire of telling of the immense loot of jewels and coins captured by the invaders. Niccolo Conti described the banks of the Ganges, circa 1420, as lined with one prosperous city after another, each well-designed, rich in gardens and orchards, silver and gold, commerce and industry. Shah Jahan's treasury was so full that he kept 2 underground strongrooms, each of some 150,000 cubic feet capacity, almost filled with silver and gold. Contemporary testimonies, says Vincent Smith, permit of no doubt that the urban population of the more important cities was well-to-do. Travelers described Agra and Fatpur Sikri as each greater and richer than London. Anquetil Duperron, journeying through the Maharata districts in 1760, found himself in the midst of the simplicity and happiness of the Golden Age. The people were cheerful, vigorous, and in high health. Clive, visiting Murshidabad in 1759, reckoned that ancient capital of Bengal as equal in extent, population, and wealth to the London of his time, with palaces far greater than those of Europe, and men richer than any individual in London. India, said Clive, was a country of inexhaustible riches. Tried by Parliament for helping himself too readily to this wealth, Clive excused himself ingeniously. He described the riches that he had found about him in India, opulent cities ready to offer him any bribe to escape indiscriminate plunder, bankers throwing open to his grasp vaults piled high with jewels and gold. And he concluded, "At this moment I stand astonished at my own moderation.